The stagecoach lurched to a halt in a cloud of dust, and Clara Whitworth gripped her carpetbag tighter as she peered through the grimy window. Dusty Hollow sprawled before her like a wounded animal, all weathered wood and sun-baked earth. The September heat of 1876 pressed down on the ramshackle buildings, making the air shimmer like water over the main street. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as sandpaper. "This here's Dusty Hollow." Clara gathered her traveling dress and stepped down, her boots hitting the hard-packed dirt with a soft thud. The smell hit her first: horse sweat, leather, whiskey, and something else she couldn't name. Freedom, perhaps, or fear. After what happened in St. Louis, she wasn't sure she could tell the difference anymore. The few folks on the street turned to stare. A woman traveling alone to a place like this was rare enough to draw attention. Clara straightened her spine, the same way she had when Edward announced his engagement to the banker's daughter. The same way she had when her own mother said teaching was no profession for a lady who should be married by now. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, and Clara's heart sank at the sight of it. The windows were boarded up, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and tumbleweeds had claimed the front steps. This was to be her new beginning, a broken-down building in a town that looked like it might blow away with the next strong wind. She was examining the rusted lock when she heard the voices. Well, what do we have here?" 3 men emerged from the shadow of the saloon across the street. Their leader, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth, wore his gun low on his hip. The other 2 flanked him like hungry coyotes. "Name's Garrett," the leader said, tipping his hat in a mockery of politeness. "I work for Mr. Kane. He owns most everything worth owning around here, including that building you're pawing at." "I'm the new schoolteacher," Clara said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "The town council hired me. I have papers." "Town council," Garrett laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "Lady, the town council is whoever Mr. Kane says it is, and he's got plans for that building, storage for his operation. So you best get back on that stage and—" "The lady's staying," the voice rumbled like distant thunder, and Clara turned to see the largest man she'd ever encountered in her life. He stood in the middle of the street like a mountain had decided to walk into town. 6 feet and 7 inches if he was an inch, shoulders broad as a barn door, hands that looked like they could snap a tree trunk. His face was weathered and hard, with a dark beard that couldn't quite hide the scar running from his left ear to his jaw. Garrett's hand twitched toward his gun. "This ain't your business, Bear." Bear. Even his name sounded like a force of nature. The giant man walked forward with surprising grace for his size, positioning himself between Clara and the 3 men. He didn't hurry, didn't swagger. He moved like a man who'd never needed to prove anything to anyone. "Made it my business when you started threatening ladies," Bear said. His voice was deep, calm, but there was something underneath it that made Clara's skin prickle. "Now, you boys are going to apologize to Miss Whitworth," Clara supplied, her voice barely a whisper. "Clara Whitworth. You're going to apologize to Miss Whitworth, and then you're going to run back to Kane and tell him the school stays as it is." Garrett's face flushed red. "You think you scare us, Calhoun? There's 3 of us and 1 of you." Bear smiled then, and it was the most unsettling thing Clara had seen since arriving. "That hardly seems fair," he said quietly. "For you." One of Garrett's men, younger and clearly nervous, tugged at his sleeve. "Come on, boss. It ain't worth it. Not with him." But Garrett was past listening. His hand went for his gun, and that's when Clara learned why they called him Bear. The big man moved faster than something his size had any right to. His hand shot out, caught Garrett's wrist before the gun cleared leather, and squeezed. The crack of bone was audible across the street. Garrett screamed, dropping to his knees. Bear leaned down, his face close to Garrett's ear, but his voice carried clearly in the still air. "You come near her again, you even look at her wrong, and you'll be moaning my name tonight when I come find you. You'll be begging me to end it quick. That's a promise." He released Garrett's wrist, and the man scrambled back, cradling his injured hand. The three of them retreated, Garrett shooting venomous looks over his shoulder but not daring to speak. Clara found herself gripping the schoolhouse wall, her legs suddenly unsteady. The violence had been so swift, so casual. Yet Bear had positioned himself to shield her throughout the entire encounter. "You hurt?" His voice was different now, still deep but gentler somehow. "No, thank you." Clara tried to stand straighter, but her knees betrayed her, buckling slightly. Strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "First day in Dusty Hollow can be rough," Bear said. "You get used to it, or you leave." Up close, she could see his eyes were the color of good coffee, dark and warm despite the hardness of his face. There was something in them, a loneliness that echoed her own. "I'm not leaving," Clara said firmly. "I came here to teach, and that's what I intend to do." Bear studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Figured as much. You got the look." "What look?" "The look of someone running towards something instead of away." He released her arms, stepped back. "School's been closed 2 years. Gonna need work." Clara surveyed the dilapidated building. "I noticed. I'll come by tomorrow. Fix the door and windows. Can't have the teacher working in a place that won't keep the wind out." Before Clara could respond, he turned and walked away, his massive frame moving through the dusty street like a ship through water. People stepped aside without him asking, some nodding respectfully, others averting their eyes. Clara watched him go, her mind whirling. She'd left St. Louis to escape the whispers, the pitying looks, the shame of being thrown over for a younger, wealthier woman. She'd come west seeking a new life, a place where her past didn't define her. Now, standing in front of a broken-down schoolhouse in a town that seemed held together by fear and grit, with the memory of Bear Calhoun's protective presence still warming her skin, Clara wondered if she'd found more than she bargained for. She turned back to the schoolhouse, squaring her shoulders. Tomorrow, she'd begin clearing out the dust and debris. Tomorrow, she'd start rebuilding the school, the town's faith in education, maybe even herself. But tonight, as the sun dropped toward the horizon and painted Dusty Hollow in shades of gold and shadow, Clara couldn't shake the memory of those coffee-colored eyes and the way Bear had said her name, like it was something worth protecting. Inside the saloon, she could hear rough voices and rougher laughter. Somewhere, a dog barked. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Clara Whitworth had come to Dusty Hollow to teach, but standing there in the failing light, she had the strangest feeling that she might learn just as much as her future students, about courage, about survival, and maybe about the kind of love that blooms in the most unlikely ground. She picked up her carpet bag and headed for the boarding house, her step steadier now. Behind her, the schoolhouse waited, patient as stone. And somewhere in this wild town, a giant named Bear was probably already planning how to fix her windows, how to make her safe. Clara didn't know it yet, but her life in Dusty Hollow had begun the moment Jeremiah Calhoun decided she was worth protecting. In the violent, uncertain world of the frontier, that decision would ripple outward like water from a thrown stone, changing everything it touched. The teacher had come to town, and Dusty Hollow would never be the same. The morning sun cast long shadows across the schoolhouse floor as Clara swept years of accumulated dust into small mountains. Her hands, once soft from handling nothing heavier than chalk and books, were already developing calluses. She paused, examining a particularly stubborn cobweb, when she heard the steady thud of boots on the porch. Bear Calhoun filled the doorway, toolbox in one massive hand, several boards balanced on his shoulder. In the morning light, he looked less like the violent guardian from yesterday and more like what he was. A working man come to do a job. "Miss Whitworth," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. Calhoun." Clara replied, then hesitated. "Or do you prefer Bear?" Something flickered across his face. "Bear's what folks call me. Have since I was 15 and already bigger than most grown men. Real name's Jeremiah, but nobody's called me that in—" He trailed off, setting down his tools. "Since when?" Since my mama died. The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Clara heard the old pain underneath. Been 18 years now. Clara returned to her sweeping, giving him space to work, but she couldn't help stealing glances. His hands, so devastating yesterday, moved with careful precision as he removed the broken door from its hinges. There was a grace to his movements that belied his size. You always been a teacher? Bear asked, fitting a new hinge. Clara laughed, but it came out bitter. According to my mother, I should have been a wife by now. Teaching was just supposed to be temporary, something to do until... She stopped, heat rising to her cheeks. Until what? Until Edward Havenford III decided the banker's daughter had a bigger dowry and better connections. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. 3 years of courtship, and he announced his engagement to her at the very party where I thought he might propose to me. Bear's hand stilled on the door. His loss. That's kind of you to say, but not being kind, being truthful. He resumed working, each movement deliberate. Man who chooses money over character ain't worth the spit to curse him with. Clara found herself smiling for the first time in months. My mother didn't see it that way. Said I'd driven him off by being too independent, too focused on my profession. A man wants a wife, not a schoolmarm. She said, Your mother sounds like she's got some fool notions. Despite herself. Clara laughed, a real laugh this time. Mr. Calhoun, that's my mother you're speaking of. Sorry, ma'am, but anyone who can't see the value in educating young minds... He shrugged those massive shoulders. Well, that's just short-sighted. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Bear fixing the door while Clara attacked the years of grime coating the windows. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It reminded her of being in a library, that peaceful sense of shared purpose. You lose your folks young? Clara asked eventually. Surprised by her own boldness, Bear tested the door, swinging it smooth on its new hinges. Pa died when I was 12. Accident at the mine. Mama followed 3 years later. Said she just got tired of living without him. I'm sorry. Long time ago. He moved to the windows, examining the broken panes. Learned early that caring too much about someone means hurting that much more when they're gone. Clara understood that sentiment too well. After Edward's betrayal, she'd sworn off matters of the heart entirely. Better to pour herself into teaching, into shaping young minds. Children might disappoint you, but they didn't destroy you the way love could. That why you live alone? She asked. Why everyone seems afraid of you? Bear's hand stilled. They afraid of me? Terrified? From what I can see? He was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he did speak, his voice was lower than usual. My size makes folks nervous. Always has. Add in that I'm quick to use my fists when needed. He shrugged. Easier to let them think I'm some kind of monster. Keeps trouble away. But you're not, Clara said softly. A monster wouldn't fix a schoolhouse. Wouldn't protect a stranger. Don't be so sure. His voice turned hard. I've done things, Miss Whitworth. Things that would make you take back those words. Man can't live out here, can't protect what needs protecting, without getting blood on his hands. Clara thought about that as she watched him work. The frontier was a different world from St. Louis society. Out here, violence wasn't hidden behind polite words and social conventions. It was raw, immediate, necessary. We've all done things, she said finally. I publicly humiliated Edward at his engagement announcement, threw wine in his face and called him names that would make a sailor blush. Very unladylike, very satisfying. Bear's deep chuckle filled the small space. Good for you. Not according to St. Louis society. I became a pariah overnight, the crazy spinster who couldn't handle rejection. That's why I'm here, Mr. Calhoun, because sometimes the only way to start over is to go somewhere where your mistakes can't follow. Jeremiah, he said suddenly. What? You can call me Jeremiah. Nobody has in so long. Might be nice to hear it again. Clara felt something shift in the air between them. Some invisible barrier lowering. All right, Jeremiah. He cleared his throat. turning back to the window. "These frames are rotted through. I'll need to replace them completely. Take me a few days to get the wood." "I can't pay you much." "Didn't ask for pay." His tone brooked no argument. Town needs a school. School needs windows. Simple as that. But Clara heard what he didn't say, that maybe he needed this too. Needed to build something instead of tear it down. Needed to be seen as something other than the town's resident enforcer. As the morning wore on, they fell into an easy rhythm. Jeremiah worked on the structural repairs while Clara cleaned and organized. He told her about the town, about the families who might send their children once word got out the school was reopening. She told him about her teaching methods, her belief that every child could learn if given the chance. "Even the Mexican kids?" Jeremiah asked. "The Cherokee mixed bloods? The children of the saloon girls?" "Every child," Clara said firmly. "Education doesn't care about bloodlines or parents' occupations." Jeremiah smiled then, a real smile that transformed his scarred face. "You're going to shake things up here. Clara Whitworth." "Good. From what I've seen, Dusty Hollow could use some shaking." When the sun reached its zenith, Jeremiah packed up his tools. "I'll be back tomorrow with lumber. Lock the door when you leave. Kane's men might come sniffing around again." "Will they?" Clara tried to keep the fear from her voice. "Maybe, but word's already spreading about yesterday. Most folks know better than to cross me when I've marked something under my protection." "Is that what I am? Under your protection?" Jeremiah paused at the door, his big frame silhouetted against the bright day. "Everyone needs protecting sometimes." "Miss Clara, even stubborn school teachers from St. Louis." After he left, Clara stood in the empty schoolhouse, running her fingers over the newly repaired door. She thought about protection and independence, about the walls she'd built around her heart after Edward's betrayal, walls that seemed less necessary here, where survival required connection, where a giant of a man could be gentle with broken windows and broken women alike. Outside, a hawk cried in the vast blue sky. Clara closed her eyes and made a decision. She wouldn't just teach in Dusty Hollow. She'd learn to be part of something instead of standing apart. Learn that needing others wasn't weakness, and maybe, just maybe, learn that Jeremiah Calhoun had as many hidden depths as the frontier itself. The schoolhouse stood waiting, patient as always. But now it felt less like a hiding place and more like a beginning. Clara picked up her broom and got back to work, humming softly. Tomorrow, Jeremiah would return with lumber and that quiet smile. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, Clara Whitworth wasn't counting the days until she could leave. She was counting the hours until tomorrow. The school bell Clara had salvaged from the debris rang clear and true on Monday morning, its sound carrying across Dusty Hollow like a challenge. 7 children stood in the dusty yard, their faces ranging from curious to skeptical. 3 were Mexican. 2 had the dark eyes and high cheekbones that spoke of Cherokee blood, and 2 were tow-headed sons of German farmers. Clara's heart swelled. 7. It was a beginning. "Welcome, students," she said, smiling warmly. "I'm Miss Whitworth, and I'm delighted to—" The sound of approaching horses cut her off. A cloud of dust announced the arrival of Silas Kane and his entourage. Kane himself was a sharp-faced man in an Eastern suit that looked absurdly out of place against the frontier backdrop. His pale eyes swept over the children with the same calculating look a man might give cattle. "Miss Whitworth, I presume." His voice was cultured, oily. "I'm Silas Kane. I believe my men already explained that this building has been repurposed." Clara stepped forward, placing herself between Kane and the children. "The town council hired me to teach. This is a school, Mr. Kane, and these are my students." Kane's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "The town council exists at my pleasure. Miss Whitworth, perhaps you don't understand how things work in Dusty Hollow. I own the largest ranch, the mining claims, the freight company. What I say becomes law. The law comes from statute books, not from wealthy men's whims." Clara replied, her teacher's voice cutting through the morning air. Kane's expression darkened. Behind him, His men shifted restlessly. Clara recognized Garrett among them, his wrist still bandaged from his encounter with Jeremiah. "You're from the East," Kane said, studying her like a specimen. "St. Louis, I'm told, fled here after some unpleasantness. A broken engagement, wasn't it? Quite the scandal, from what my sources say." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her voice steady. "My past is my own business. Mr. Kane, my present is teaching these children." "These children?" Kane laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Half-breeds and greasers, the offspring of farmers who can barely speak English? What future do you imagine you're preparing them for?" Behind her, Clara heard the youngest child, Maria Delgado, begin to cry softly. Something hot and fierce rose in Clara's chest. "A better future than one where they're taught to bow and scrape before bullies," she said clearly. The silence that followed was electric. Kane's men exchanged glances, hands drifting toward their weapons. But Kane himself just smiled wider. "You know what I think, Miss Whitworth? I think you're a lonely woman playing at being important. Teaching these mongrels won't fill the empty place in your bed or your heart." The words hit like a physical blow, cruel and calculated to wound. Clara's hands trembled, but she raised her chin higher. "And I think you're a small man who needs to make others smaller to feel big," she retorted. "Now get off school property before you what?" Kane stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his pomade and cigars. "Call for help? Who's going to come? That animal Calhoun? He's not here, is he?" Kane reached out as if to touch her face, and Clara slapped his hand away. The crack echoed in the morning air. For a moment, rage flashed across Kane's features, raw and ugly. "You just made a serious mistake," he said quietly. "This building will be empty by week's end, one way or another. And you, Miss Whitworth, will learn that." "There a problem here?" Jeremiah's voice rolled across the schoolyard like thunder. He stood at the gate, hammer in hand from the repairs he'd been making to the fence. But it wasn't a tool in his grip. It was a weapon, and everyone knew it. Kane stepped back from Clara, his composure returning. "Mr. Calhoun, just having a civilized discussion with the new school teacher about property rights. Looked like harassment to me," Jeremiah said, walking forward with that peculiar grace of his. "And I distinctly recall telling your boys what would happen if they bothered Miss Whitworth again. You can't threaten me. Calhoun, I have lawyers, connections, and I have this hammer and a powerful desire to use it," Jeremiah replied conversationally. "Your choice how this goes." Kane's face flushed, but he was too smart to push further. "Not here, not now. This isn't over," he said, looking at Clara. "You can't protect her forever, Calhoun. Or those brats she's collecting. Watch me," Jeremiah said simply. Kane and his men mounted up and rode off, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Clara turned to find her students huddled together, eyes wide with fear and something else, hope. Maybe that someone had stood up to Kane. "Children, please go inside," Clara said gently. "We'll begin lessons in a moment." They filed in quietly, shooting odd glances at Jeremiah. When they were alone, Clara found herself trembling. "Sit," Jeremiah said, guiding her to the steps. "First time being threatened by a snake like Kane can shake anyone. He knew about St. Louis," Clara whispered. "About Edward. How could he? Men like Kane make it their business to know things. Information is power, and power is all he understands." Jeremiah sat beside her, the steps creaking under his weight. "Don't let him make you ashamed of your past. Easy for you to say. You don't have a scandal following you." Jeremiah was quiet for a moment. "I killed my first man when I was 16, he said finally. "Caught him trying to force himself on a girl from town. Beat him to death with my bare hands. Judge called it justified, but folks looked at me different after. Saw a killer instead of a kid." Clara looked at his hands, now resting gently on his knees, hands that could build and destroy with equal ease. "Is that why you let them fear you? Because they already do anyway." Sometimes fear is useful, keeps men like Cain cautious. But, he glanced at her, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be seen as something else. I see something else, Clara said softly. Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them, fragile as spun glass and just as precious. Then Clara heard Maria crying again inside, and the moment broke. I should get to my students, she said, standing. I'll finish the fence. Jeremiah replied. And Clara, Cain meant what he said. He'll come at you sideways now, through the children, their families. Anyone he can pressure. This is just the beginning. Clara squared her shoulders. Then I'd better teach these children while I can. Every day matters. Inside, 7 pairs of eyes watched her expectantly. Clara picked up her chalk and began to write the alphabet on the board Jeremiah had installed last week. Who can tell me what this letter is? She asked, pointing to the A. Hands shot up, eager despite the morning's confrontation. Or perhaps because of it. Perhaps seeing adults stand up to bullies had taught them something more valuable than any lesson she'd planned. Through the window, Clara could see Jeremiah working on the fence, his presence a solid comfort. She knew Cain would return, knew this fight was far from over. But for now, in this moment, she had 7 students ready to learn and a guardian angel in work clothes watching over them all. A is for apple, she said, drawing the fruit next to the letter. And A is for ambition. Does anyone know what ambition means? Maria Delgado raised her hand, tear tracks still visible on her brown cheeks. It means wanting something better. Clara smiled. Exactly right, Maria, and that's what we're all here for, something better. Now, let's see what other words start with A. Outside. The hammer rang against nails in a steady rhythm. Inside. Chalk scratched against board and young voices repeated after their teacher, and somewhere in town. Silas Cain sat in his office, planning his next move. The battle for Dusty Hollow's future had begun, and Clara Whitworth stood at its center, armed with nothing but determination and alphabet lessons. But sometimes, that was enough to start a revolution. Sometimes, that was everything. The morning sun filtered through the new windows as Clara arrived to find Jeremiah already at work, replacing rotten floorboards near the back of the schoolhouse. His shirt was off, tucked into his belt, and Clara found herself frozen in the doorway, watching the play of muscles across his scarred back as he worked. Morning, he said without turning around, and Clara flushed at being caught staring. Good morning. You're here early. Wanted to get this done before the children arrive. Don't need anyone falling through. He straightened, turning to face her, and Clara had to force herself to meet his eyes rather than study the broad expanse of his chest. That's thoughtful of you, she managed, setting down her books with hands that trembled slightly. Jeremiah pulled on his shirt, and Clara wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed. Found something when I pulled up the boards, he said, producing a small leather journal. Looks like the previous teacher's. Clara took it reverently, opening the yellowed pages. Margaret Clemens, she read. She taught here from 1871 to 1874. She scanned the entries, her excitement growing. She kept records of all her students, their progress, their families. This is wonderful. What happened to her? Jeremiah asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Clara found the final entry and her face fell. Scarlet fever. She died along with 3 of her students. She closed the journal gently. Sometimes I forget how dangerous frontier life can be. It's hard country. Jeremiah agreed, returning to his work. Takes as much as it gives. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Clara organizing supplies while Jeremiah finished the floor repairs. She found herself stealing glances at him, noting the careful way he tested each board, the patience in his movements. Can I ask you something? She said suddenly. Ask. That first day, when you told Garrett he'd be moaning your name. What did you mean? Jeremiah's hand stilled. You really want to know? Yes. He set down his hammer, considering his words. Men like Garrett understand one thing, consequences. the fear of pain. Sometimes, the threat of violence is the only thing that keeps actual violence from happening. But you would have done it? Hurt him? To protect you and the children? Yes. His dark eyes met hers steadily. Does that frighten you? Clara thought about it, really thought about it. In St. Louis, violence was hidden, sanitized. Here, it was honest, sometimes necessary. It should, she said finally. But it doesn't. Maybe that makes me a hypocrite. Makes you practical, Jeremiah corrected. Can't teach dead children. The blunt words should have shocked her, but Clara found herself laughing instead. That's a grim way to put it. Truth often is. He returned to his work, then added quietly, My PA used to say that a man's hands should be good for building and fighting both. Building for the people you love, fighting for the things worth protecting. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He taught me carpentry, taught me to read, taught me that being strong meant knowing when not to use your strength. Jeremiah's voice carried old grief. Wish he'd lived long enough to teach me more. Clara moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. You've done well with what he gave you. Have I? Jeremiah looked at his hands. Most days I feel like I'm just the town's tame monster, the thing they point at their problems. You're not a monster, Clara said firmly. A monster wouldn't carefully replace floorboards so children don't get hurt. Wouldn't spend his own money on windows for a school. You see the best in people, Jeremiah said, even when it might not be there. And you see the worst in yourself when it isn't warranted. Clara surprised herself by reaching out, touching his scarred hand gently. These hands have built more than they've broken. Haven't they? Jeremiah turned his hand palm up, his fingers curling slightly around hers. Trying to, he said roughly. Some days are harder than others. The air between them shifted, charged with possibility. Clara knew she should pull away, knew that caring for this gentle giant was dangerous to her already bruised heart. But his hand was warm, calloused in all the right places, and it had been so long since anyone had touched her with such careful tenderness. I should put on coffee, she said, not moving. Should you? The children will be here soon. Not for an hour yet. They stood there, hands linked, two damaged souls finding something unexpected in each other. Then Clara heard wagon wheels outside and reluctantly stepped back. That'll be Tom Wheeler with the lumber for the new desks, Jeremiah said, but his eyes lingered on her face. Clara busied herself with the coffee pot, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd come to Dusty Hollow to escape romantic entanglements, not find new ones. But as she watched Jeremiah help unload the lumber, laughing at something Tom said, she realized that sometimes the heart didn't care about plans. Miss Clara! Young William Schmidt burst through the door, followed by his sister Emma. Pa says we can come every day now. He says any man brave enough to stand up to Mr. Kane deserves our support. Soon all 12 of her students' word had spread, and more families were sending their children, filled the small space with chatter and energy. Clara lost herself in teaching, in the joy of watching understanding dawn on young faces. But throughout the morning, she was aware of Jeremiah working outside, building desk frames with patient precision. During the lunch break, Maria Delgado tugged on Clara's skirt. Miss Clara, why does Mr. Bear stay here all day? Doesn't he have other work? Clara glanced out the window where Jeremiah was showing the older boys how to properly sand wood. I think he likes building things, she said carefully. My mama says he's sweet on you, Maria announced with 6-year-old certainty. Says she hasn't seen him smile this much since before his mama died. Maria, that's, Clara began, flustered. She says you're good for each other, Maria continued blithely. Two lonely hearts finding comfort. That's what she told Papa. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Perhaps you should eat your lunch instead of sharing your mother's observations. But Maria's words stayed with her through the afternoon lessons. Two lonely hearts finding comfort. Was that what they were? And was comfort enough when both of them carried such deep wounds? As the children prepared to leave, Clara noticed Samuel Redhawk, one of her Cherokee students, hanging back. The boy was 12, quiet, quick to learn but slow to trust. "What is it, Samuel?" she asked gently. "Mister, Kane came to our farm last night," the boy said quietly. "Told my PA that half-breeds don't need education. Said if I kept coming here, there'd be consequences." Clara's blood ran cold. "What did your father say?" "That his son would learn to read and write, even if it meant fighting every one of Kane's men." Samuel's dark eyes were fierce with pride. "But I'm scared. Miss Clara. Not for me, but for Pa." Clara knelt down, meeting his eyes. "Your father is very brave, Samuel, and I promise you, I'll do everything I can to keep you all safe. Education is your right, not a privilege, mister. Kane can take away." After the children left, Clara found Jeremiah cleaning up his tools. She told him about Samuel, watched his face darken with each word. "He's escalating," Jeremiah said. "Going after the families. Typical Kane move." "What do we do?" "We protect them," Jeremiah said simply. "All of them. I'll talk to the families. Make sure they know they're not alone. You can't watch everyone. Jeremiah, you're just one man." He looked at her then, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "Not just me anymore," he said quietly. "You've given them something to fight for. Clara, hope is a powerful weapon." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Clara stood with Jeremiah on the schoolhouse steps. The building was transformed, windows gleaming, new doors sturdy and true, fresh boards replacing the rotten ones. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. Not done yet," he replied. "Still need to build those desks, fix the roof before winter." "That's not what I meant." He turned to her, and Clara saw in his eyes the same longing she felt, the same careful hope. "Clara," he began, then stopped, struggling for words. "I know," she said. "I know. We're both too damaged for this, too careful, too afraid." "Maybe," he agreed. "Or maybe we're exactly damaged enough to understand each other." He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with infinite gentleness. Clara leaned into the touch, just for a moment, allowing herself this small comfort. "I should go," she said finally. "Mrs. Morrison will have dinner waiting. I'll walk you." They made their way through town as the shadows lengthened, not touching but aware of each other with every step. At the boarding house gate, Jeremiah paused. "Kane won't give up," he said. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." "Then we'd better be ready," Clara replied. "All of us, together." He smiled then, that rare, transformative smile. "Together," he agreed. As Clara watched him walk away, his massive frame disappearing into the gathering dusk, she thought about building and breaking, about hope and fear, about two lonely hearts finding something unexpected in a frontier schoolhouse. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats. But tonight, Clara Whitworth allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth fighting for, and someone worth fighting beside. The smell of the smoke woke Clara before dawn. She rushed to her window at Mrs. Morrison's boarding house to see an orange glow lighting the pre-dawn sky. Her heart seized. The direction of the fire was unmistakable. She threw on her dress and boots, not bothering with proper buttons or her hair, and ran through the empty streets. Others were emerging from their homes, some carrying buckets, all heading toward the same terrible light. The Red Hawk farm was ablaze. Clara arrived to find the barn fully engulfed, flames licking hungrily at the modest farmhouse. John Red Hawk and his wife Mary were frantically hauling water from their well, while Samuel and his younger siblings formed a bucket line. "Where's Jeremiah?" Clara grabbed a bucket, joining the line. "When inside?" John Red Hawk shouted over the roar of flames. "Our daughter, she was sleeping in the loft." Clara's blood turned to ice. The house was already partly consumed, smoke pouring from every window. Without thinking, she dropped her bucket and ran toward the door. Strong arms caught her. "No!" Tom Wheeler held her back. "You'll die in there. Let me go. Jeremiah!" A crash from inside cut her off as part of the roof collapsed. Clara fought against Tom's grip, tears streaming down her face. This couldn't be happening. Not Jeremiah. Not when she'd just begun to... A figure burst through the front door. Massive frame bent protectively over a small bundle. Jeremiah staggered out, his clothes singed and smoking. Little Anna Redhawk clutched in his arms. He made it 10 feet before his legs gave out, dropping to his knees but still shielding the child. Clara broke free and ran to them. Anna was crying but alive, and Clara quickly passed her to her sobbing mother. Jeremiah's breathing was labored, his face streaked with soot and blood from a gash on his forehead. "You fool," Clara said, her voice breaking. "You magnificent, reckless fool." "Had to," he gasped. "Couldn't let..." "Shh." Clara helped him away from the burning building as more townspeople arrived to fight the flames. "Don't talk. Just breathe." Doc Winters appeared, checking Jeremiah over with practiced efficiency. Burns on his back and arms, smoke in his lungs, but he'll live. Lucky the beam that caught him was mostly burnt through already. As dawn broke properly, the fire was finally contained, though the barn was completely lost and the house badly damaged. The Redhawks stood among the ruins of their home, faces etched with despair. "Found this." Sheriff Thompson held up a kerosene can. "And these tracks lead toward town. 3 riders, maybe 4. Everyone knew without asking who was responsible. Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot as the flames that had destroyed the Redhawk home. "We can't prove it was Kane," the sheriff said reluctantly. "Tracks don't mean... We all know who it was." Clara interrupted. "The only question is what we're going to do about it." "What can we do?" Mary Redhawk asked, holding her children close. "He has money, men, influence. We have nothing. You have us," Clara said firmly. She looked around at the gathered townspeople, farmers, shopkeepers, laborers. "All of us. This isn't just about the school anymore. It's about whether we'll let one man terrorize our community." "Pretty words," someone muttered. "But Kane owns half the territory." "Then it's time to remind him he doesn't own us," Clara replied. She turned to find Jeremiah struggling to his feet despite Doc's protests. "What are you doing?" "Standing with you," he said simply. The next hours passed in a blur. The Redhawks were settled temporarily with neighbors. Clara organized the women to gather clothing and supplies, but she knew charity wouldn't solve the real problem. That evening, she sat with Jeremiah on the schoolhouse steps. His burns were bandaged, his breathing still rough, but he'd refused to rest. "You could have died," she said quietly. "So could Anna." "That's not..." Clara stopped, frustrated. "Why does everything have to be so matter-of-fact with you? You ran into a burning building." "And I'd do it again." He turned to look at her. "Just like you were about to before Tom stopped you." Clara flushed. "That was different. I was being foolish." "No, you were being brave. There's a difference between fearlessness and courage." "Clara, fearless people don't feel afraid. Courageous people feel afraid and act anyway." His hand found hers. "You're the most courageous person I know. I'm terrified," she admitted. "Kane's escalating. First threats, then harassment, now attempted murder. What's next? Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Clara studied their joined hands, hers small and ink-stained, his large and scarred, now bearing new burns from his heroics. Samuel asked if he should still come to school tomorrow. I didn't know what to tell him. "What did you want to tell him?" "To come, to not let them win. But what if Kane targets the school next? What if children get hurt because of my stubbornness?" Jeremiah squeezed her hand gently. "You're not the one putting them in danger. Kane is, and giving in to bullies just teaches them that violence works. Easy to say when it's not your responsibility, isn't it?" His voice was sharp. "Every person in this town is my responsibility. Has been since I was 16 and realized I had the strength to protect folks who couldn't protect themselves. You think I don't lie awake wondering if I'm making things worse? If my presence escalates situations that might otherwise die down?" Clara saw the weight he carried then, the burden of being the town's protector. "I'm sorry, I didn't think..." Nothing to apologize for. His voice gentled. We're both trying to do right by these people. Question is, what does right look like when facing down evil? They sat in silence as the stars emerged, bright and indifferent to human struggles. Finally, Clara spoke. My father was a newspaperman in St. Louis. He used to say that evil flourishes when good people do nothing. I thought it was just a pretty phrase until... She paused, gathering courage. Until I realized I'd been doing nothing my whole life. Following rules, meeting expectations, never making waves. Even with Edward, I accepted his lukewarm affection because it was proper, expected. I was sleepwalking through life. And now I'm awake, terrified, but awake. And I'd rather face Cain's worst than go back to that comfortable numbness. Jeremiah lifted their joined hands, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender from such a rough man, that Clara's breath caught. Then we stand and fight, he said. All of us, together. Over the next days, something shifted in Dusty Hollow. The fire at the Red Hawk farm had been meant to terrorize, but it had the opposite effect. Families who'd been wavering sent their children to school. Men who'd avoided confrontation began standing straighter when Cain's riders passed. The women organized, creating a network to watch each other's children and property. Clara's school became the unofficial heart of this quiet resistance. She taught lessons in the morning, but afternoons often found adults crowding in, learning to read contracts and legal documents, understanding their rights. Knowledge is power, Clara told them, and Cain's greatest weapon is your ignorance of your own rights. Jeremiah became a constant presence, not just as protector, but as part of the community fabric. He taught the older boys carpentry, showing them how to build and repair. The skills were practical, but the lessons went deeper, about taking pride in honest work, about building rather than destroying. One evening, as Clara was locking up, she found a note tucked under the door. The handwriting was crude but clear. You were warned. Before the new moon. You'll understand the price of defiance. She showed it to Jeremiah, watched his face darken. New moon's in 3 days, he said. Should I close the school? That what you want to do? Clara thought of her students, of Samuel Red Hawk's determination despite his family's losses, of little Maria Delgado's bright eagerness to learn. No, she said firmly. Never. Then we prepare. Jeremiah said, time to stop playing defense. That night, he called a town meeting. Not everyone came. Some were too afraid. Others too tied to Cain financially, but enough came. Enough to matter. Cain wants us divided. Jeremiah told the gathered crowd. Wants us scared, isolated, easy to pick off one by one, but we're not cattle to be herded. We're a community. And it's time we started acting like one. Plans were made, watch schedules organized, the school would be guarded every night. Families would check on each other. And most importantly, they would document everything, every threat, every incident, building a legal case that even Cain's connections couldn't ignore. As the meeting dispersed, Clara found herself walking with Jeremiah through the quiet streets. The night was cool, autumn coming early to the high desert. You've changed things, Jeremiah said suddenly. This town, me, everything's different since you rang that school bell. Change was already here, Clara replied. I just gave it a focal point. No. He stopped walking, turned to face her. You gave us hope, gave me hope, made me believe that maybe I could be more than just the town's enforcer. You've always been more than that. Not to myself, not until... He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing her cheeks. Not until you looked at me and saw something worth saving. Clara's heart thundered as he leaned down, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met softly, a question and answer all at once. When they parted, Clara was trembling. This complicates things, she whispered. Everything worth having does. He replied. They heard horses approaching fast and stepped apart. A rider galloped past, not slowing, but both recognized one of Cain's men. Scouting, Jeremiah said grimly. They're coming. Clara, soon. Clara straightened her spine, the taste of him still on her lips, courage and fear warring in her chest. Then we'd better be ready. The new moon was coming, and with it, Cain's promised reckoning. But Clara Whitworth had found something worth fighting for: a school, a community, and a gentle giant who kissed like hope itself. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone, in Dusty Hollow. Nobody would face it alone anymore. The new moon brought darkness so complete that Clara could barely see her hand in front of her face. She'd moved the children's lessons to the church at Reverend Patterson's insistence, a solid stone building with fewer windows and better sight lines. The school stood empty, a deliberate choice after much debate. Let them burn an empty building if they must. Jeremiah had said, buildings can be rebuilt, children can't. Now, Clara sat with her students in the church, pretending to teach arithmetic while her ears strained for any sound of trouble. Jeremiah was out there somewhere in the darkness with Tom Wheeler and a handful of other men, patrolling the town's perimeter. "Miss Clara," Samuel Redhawk whispered, "you're holding the chalk so tight it's about to break." Clara loosened her grip, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Samuel. Now, who can solve this problem on the board?" The shot came just as Maria Delgado raised her hand. It cracked through the night like thunder, followed immediately by shouts and the thunder of hooves. Clara's heart stopped. "Everyone down!" she commanded, and her students dropped to the floor with practiced efficiency. They'd drilled this too many times in the past days. More shots. Closer now. Clara crawled to the window, peering cautiously out. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness near the saloon. Her mind raced. That was the opposite direction from the school. A diversion? The church door burst open and Clara spun. The derringer Jeremiah had insisted she carry already in her hand. But it was Mrs. Wheeler, white-faced and breathless. "They're at the jail," she gasped. "Cain's men broke Garrett out. Tom's pinned down with the sheriff. And," her voice broke, "they say bear's down. Shot bad." The world tilted. Clara gripped the back of a pew, forcing herself to think past the terror clawing at her throat. Jeremiah shot, maybe dying. "No. Take the children to the root cellar," she told Mrs. Wheeler, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Bar the door. Don't come out until I say, 'Clara, you can't. Go!'" Clara was already moving, checking her derringer, grabbing the rifle Reverend Patterson kept in the vestry. "Keep them safe." She slipped out into the darkness, keeping to the shadows. The shooting had intensified near the jail, but Clara's instinct screamed that it was still a feint. Cain was too smart to waste his men on a frontal assault. She heard them before she saw them. Whispered voices near the school. Her school. Despite everything, they were still targeting it, empty or not. Symbol mattered to men like Cain. Said to wait for the signal. Burn it quick and get to the church. The church. Clara's blood turned to ice. The diversion at the jail, the attack on the school, all to draw defenders away from the real target. The children. She couldn't stop them all, but she could warn the others. Clara raised the rifle and fired into the air, the shot echoing across town. Then she was running, cutting through alleys she'd learned in her weeks here, racing the riders she could hear responding to her warning shot. She burst through the church's side door to find chaos. Mrs. Wheeler was hustling children toward the cellar, but riders were already dismounting out front. Clara barred the door and ran to help. "Miss Clara!" Maria clung to her skirts. "Are the bad men coming?" "Yes, sweetheart, but we're going to be safe. Remember what we practiced. Be brave like—" The front doors exploded inward. 3 men entered, guns drawn, and Clara's heart sank as she recognized the leader, not Garrett, but Silas Cain himself, dressed for violence in dark clothes, his usually slick hair wild. "Miss Whitworth," he said pleasantly, as if meeting her at a social function. "I believe you have something of mine. Several somethings, actually." His gaze swept over the cowering children. "These little mongrels should be working my fields, not filling their heads with useless letters." Clara stepped forward, shielding the children. "They're not property. Mr. Kane, they're human beings with the right to— Kane backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. The children cried out, and Samuel Redhawk started forward, but Clara raised a hand to stop him. Ah, yes, the Redhawk boy. Kane noticed him. How's the new house coming along? Oh, wait. He smiled coldly. You don't have one anymore, do you? Leave them alone, Clara said, tasting blood. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with this entire festering town. Kane snarled, his cultured veneer cracking. I came here to build an empire, and instead I find bleeding hearts and savages who don't know their place. But that ends tonight. He gestured to his men. Take the Mexican and Indian brats. Leave the white ones. Their parents might still be useful. And bring the teacher. She's going to watch what happens to— The side door exploded off its hinges as Jeremiah burst through like an avenging angel. Blood soaked his left shoulder. His face was pale as death, but his eyes burned with fury Clara had never seen before. Kane's men turned to fire, but Jeremiah was already among them. He caught the first man's gun hand, crushed it with a wet crack, then used him as a shield against the second man's shot. The third tried to run, but Jeremiah's massive fist caught him between the shoulders, sending him crashing into the pews. It was over in seconds. Kane stood alone, his pearl-handled revolver wavering between Jeremiah and Clara. The big man swayed on his feet, more blood seeping through his shirt, but his gaze never left Kane. Impossible, Kane breathed. Garrett said he put 2 bullets in you. Takes more than that, Jeremiah growled. Taking a step forward, Kane's gun swung toward him. Stop, I'll shoot. Then shoot. Another step. But you better kill me with the first shot, because if you don't, I'm going to tear you apart with my bare hands. Kane's hand shook. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be in control. Supposed to— Clara moved. Not toward Kane, but to the children, gathering them behind the altar. Don't watch, she told them softly. Close your eyes and count to 20. Because she knew Jeremiah. Knew that wounded or not, he was death-walking for any who threatened those under his protection. And Kane had threatened the children, had struck her, had burned the Redhawks out. You're just an animal, Kane said desperately. A mindless brute who— Maybe, Jeremiah agreed, still advancing. But I'm her animal, their animal, this town's animal, and you threatened my pack. Kane fired. The bullet took Jeremiah high in the chest, spinning him half around, but he didn't fall. Instead, he laughed, a sound that raised the hair on Clara's neck. That all you got? Jeremiah asked. My turn. He lunged forward with speed that defied his injuries. Kane got off one more wild shot before those massive hands closed on him. The gun went flying. Kane screamed, high and terrified, as Jeremiah lifted him like a child. Please, Kane begged. I have money, influence. I can make you rich. Don't want your money, Jeremiah said conversationally. Want you gone. Sheriff Thompson and Tom Wheeler burst in, guns drawn, to find Jeremiah holding Kane suspended in the air. Bear, the sheriff called. Put him down. We'll handle this legal like— Jeremiah looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. She could tell him to do it. Knew he would snap Kane like kindling if she asked. The man had terrorized her students, burned families out, tried to destroy everything she'd built here. Part of her wanted to nod, wanted to see fear in Kane's eyes the way he'd put fear in children's hearts. But then she looked at her students, peeking around the altar despite her instructions. Watching, learning, waiting to see what their teacher would choose. Put him down, Jeremiah, she said softly. We're better than he is. We have to be. Jeremiah held Kane a moment longer, then dropped him in a heap. Kane scrabbled backward, all dignity gone. Silas Kane, Sheriff Thompson said formally. You're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and about a dozen other charges I'll think of by morning. You can't, Kane protested as Tom Wheeler hauled him up. I own judges, senators. You'll all hang for this. Maybe, the sheriff agreed. But you'll face trial first. Real trial. With all the evidence we've been collecting. And something tells me those judges you own won't be so friendly when they see what you've been up to. As they dragged Cain out, Clara ran to Jeremiah, who had finally collapsed into a pew. Blood. Too much blood. She pressed her hands against the wounds, trying to stem the flow. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare die on me now." "Not planning to," he managed. "You still owe me that dance." "What dance?" "The one at our wedding." Clara laughed and sobbed at the same time. "That's a terrible proposal, Jeremiah Calhoun." "I'll do better when I'm not bleeding." His hand found hers, sticky with blood but still gentle. "The children, they safe?" "Yes, thanks to you. All safe." Doc Winters arrived, taking over with practiced efficiency. As he worked, the children crept closer, surrounding Jeremiah's pew like small guardians. "Is Mr. Bear going to be okay?" Maria asked, tears streaming down her face. "He's too stubborn to die," Clara said, but she was praying harder than she'd ever prayed before. The night stretched long and terrible. Doc removed 2 bullets and stitched what seemed like miles of wounds. Jeremiah drifted in and out of consciousness, Clara never leaving his side. The children refused to go home, curling up in the pews like a protective pack around their wounded defender. Dawn was breaking when Jeremiah's eyes opened clearly. He looked at Clara, at the sleeping children surrounding them, at the blood-stained church that had become a battlefield and then a sanctuary. "Still here?" he asked hoarsely. "Always?" Clara promised. "Someone has to keep you from charging into gunfights." "Worked out, didn't it?" "Barely." She squeezed his hand. "Was that really a proposal earlier? Or were you delirious?" "Both," he admitted. "But meant it. If you'll have me, scars and all." Clara looked at this man who'd walked through fire and bullets for her and the children, who'd chosen building over destroying even when violence came easier, who'd shown her that strength and gentleness could live in the same heart. "Yes," she said simply, "scars and all." Outside, Dusty Hollow was waking to its first morning without Cain's shadow. There would be more challenges, legal battles, rebuilding, healing. But for now, in a blood-stained church filled with sleeping children and the promise of sunrise, Clara Whitworth held her gentle giant's hand and believed in tomorrow. The teacher and the protector, the builder and the fighter, 2 scarred hearts choosing hope over fear, love over isolation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was real. The dawn of the confrontation found Dusty Hollow transformed into a battlefield. Word had spread through the night. Cain's remaining men were coming. A small army of hired guns determined to free their boss and burn the town to ash. Clara stood on the schoolhouse steps, watching men who'd never held weapons prepare to defend their homes. 30 riders, maybe more, Tom Wheeler reported, fresh from scouting. "They'll hit us by noon." Jeremiah, still pale and bandaged from the church fight 3 days prior, checked his rifle with steady hands. Doc Winters had forbidden him to fight, but Clara knew nothing would keep him from the coming battle. "The women and children?" Clara asked. "Reverend Patterson's got them fortified in the church cellar, stone walls, one way in or out." Tom spat tobacco juice. "Safe as we can make them." But Clara shook her head. "I'm not hiding in a cellar while you men fight for our town." "Clara," Jeremiah began. "No." Her voice was steel. "I started this by ringing that school bell. I'll see it through." She'd spent the morning teaching the older women to load rifles, showing them firing positions from the school windows. Mrs. Wheeler, Mrs. Redhawk, and a dozen others who refused to cower. They weren't warriors, but they were mothers, and that made them dangerous when their children were threatened. Sheriff Thompson had telegraphed for help, but the nearest federal marshals were days away. They were alone, a handful of townspeople against professional killers. "Main Street," Jeremiah said, studying the terrain with a soldier's eye. They'll come straight down, expecting us to scatter. He'd served in the war. Clara had learned. Another scar on his soul. We make our stand here. Barricades rose across the dusty thoroughfare, overturned wagons, barrels, anything that might stop a bullet. The saloon became a fortress, the general store a strong point, and the schoolhouse, Clara's schoolhouse, anchored their left flank. By 11, the town waited in eerie silence. Clara stood at a window, rifle heavy in her hands, watching heat shimmer off the desert. Beside her, Mary Redhawk loaded ammunition with grim efficiency. "My Samuel wanted to fight," Mary said quietly. "Had to lock him in the root cellar to keep him from grabbing his father's gun." "He's brave," Clara said. "Like his parents. Brave gets people killed out here." Mary's hands never stopped moving. "But sometimes cowardice kills them slower. Cain taught us that." Dust on the horizon. Clara's mouth went dry. "They're coming." The riders appeared like a dark wave, spreading across the plain. At their head rode Garrett, his wrist still splinted from Jeremiah's grip, face twisted with anticipated revenge. They stopped just outside rifle range, and Garrett rode forward alone. "Last chance," he called. "Give us Cain and the schoolteacher, and we ride on. Nobody else has to die." Sheriff Thompson stepped out from behind a barricade. "Cain's in federal custody by now, on his way to Denver for trial. As for Miss Whitworth, you'll have to go through us." Garrett smiled. "Happy to oblige." He raised his hand, and the charge began. Thunder filled the air as 30 riders bore down on Dusty Hollow. Clara fired, worked the lever, fired again, picking her targets. Beside her, Mary Redhawk proved to have a steady aim, dropping a rider with her first shot. The initial charge broke against their barricades, horses screaming, men falling. But Cain's mercenaries were professionals. They dismounted, took cover, began a steady advance. "Left flank!" someone shouted. And Clara turned to see riders circling toward the school. She and the women shifted their fire, but there were too many. Then Jeremiah was there, moving despite his wounds, the big Sharps rifle in his hands booming like cannon. Each shot dropped a man, buying precious seconds. "Clara, down!" She dropped as windows exploded above her, showering glass. When she looked up, Garrett himself stood in the doorway, gun aimed at her head. "The giant's woman," he sneered. "Killing you will hurt him more than any bullet." Time slowed. Clara saw his finger tighten on the trigger, knew she couldn't bring her rifle up in time. She thought of St. Louis, of Edward, of all the safe choices she might have made. No regrets. The shot was impossibly loud in the small space. Clara flinched, waiting for the impact. Instead, Garrett's eyes went wide with surprise. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then toppled forward. Behind him stood Samuel Redhawk, his father's pistol smoking in his 12-year-old hands. "Nobody threatens my teacher," he said simply. The battle raged for another hour. Cain's men pressing hard but unable to break through. The turning point came when the Mexican vaqueros from the outlying ranches arrived. Men who'd stayed neutral until they heard the school was threatened, until they knew their children's teacher was in danger. Caught between defenders and reinforcements, Cain's army crumbled. Some fled into the desert, others threw down their guns. By sunset, it was over. Clara found Jeremiah slumped against a wagon wheel, fresh blood seeping through his bandages. She knelt beside him, hands gentle on his face. "You tore your stitches," she said, voice unsteady. "Worth it," he managed. "You're safe, town safe. Thanks to you, to all of us." She looked around at their battered defenders, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, children who'd grown up too fast. "We did it." "Together," Jeremiah agreed. Then, louder, "Clara, yes? That proposal, in the church, still stands. Despite everything, the blood, the fear, the acrid smell of gunpowder." Clara laughed. "Now? You're asking now? Seems like a good time. We're alive. We won. And I love you." The words hung in the air, simple and true, around them. The town began to assess the damage. tend the wounded, count their miracles. But for Clara, the world narrowed to this moment. This man. "I love you too," she said. "Yes, always yes." He pulled something from his pocket. A simple silver ring, worn smooth with age. "Was my mother's. Kept it all these years, never knowing why. Now I do." Clara let him slide it onto her finger. The metal warm from his touch. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. "Miss Clara!" Maria Delgado's voice broke the moment. The little girl ran up, miraculously clean despite the day's chaos. "Are you getting married? To Mr. Bear?" "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said, not looking away from Jeremiah's eyes. "I am." Maria clapped her hands. "Can we have the wedding at school, with flowers and cake and everything?" Jeremiah chuckled, then winced as it pulled his wounds. "Wherever the lady wants." Sheriff Thompson approached. Hat in hand. "Federal marshals will be here tomorrow. They'll want statements, but looks like a clear case of self-defense all around." He paused. "Kane's facing 20 years, minimum. His empire's finished." Clara felt no triumph, only relief. It was over. Really over. As Doc Winters arrived to properly tend Jeremiah's wounds again, Clara stood and surveyed their town. Buildings bore scars of battle, but they stood. People were battered but unbroken. And tomorrow, children would return to school. "We'll need to fix the windows again," she said. Jeremiah caught her hand. "We'll build them stronger this time. Build everything stronger." That night, as Clara helped tend the wounded and comfort the frightened, she thought about strength. Not the strength of violence, though that had been necessary, but the strength of community, of people standing together against tyranny, the strength of education over ignorance, hope over fear, the strength of a gentle giant who'd chosen to protect rather than destroy, and a teacher who'd chosen to stand rather than run. Later, she found Samuel Redhawk sitting alone behind the school, the pistol lying beside him. He looked up as she approached, tears tracking through the dirt on his face. "I killed him," he said simply. "I killed a man." Clara sat beside him, choosing her words carefully. "You saved my life. There's a difference between violence for its own sake and protecting those you care about. Does it get easier, the remembering?" "No," Clara said honestly. "But you learn to carry it, and you remember why you did it, not for hate, but for love." They sat in silence as stars emerged overhead. Finally, Samuel asked, "Will you really marry Mr. Bear?" "I will." "Good. He smiles when you're around. We like it when he smiles." Clara pulled the boy close. This child who'd been forced to become a warrior. "There will be more smiling from now on. I promise." As if in answer, she heard Jeremiah's deep laugh from the church where Doc was working. Even wounded, even after all the violence, he could still find joy. They all could. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and repairs, federal investigators and the slow work of healing. But tonight, Dusty Hollow stood free, a town that had found its courage, a community that had discovered its strength. And in the midst of it all, a teacher and her protector had found each other. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A love forged in fire and proved in battle. Strong enough to build a future on. The school bell would ring again tomorrow, and Clara Whitworth, soon to be Clara Calhoun, would be there to answer it. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline sky that only the high desert could produce. Clara stood before the small mirror in Mrs. Morrison's boarding house, adjusting the simple white dress the town women had sewn for her. It wasn't silk or satin like she might have worn in St. Louis, but the care in every stitch made it more beautiful than any society gown. "You look radiant," Mary Redhawk said, pinning wildflowers in Clara's hair. "Like you belong here." "I do belong here," Clara replied, surprising herself with the fierce certainty in her voice. 6 months ago, she'd arrived in Dusty Hollow running from heartbreak. Now she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The schoolhouse had been transformed. Samuel Redhawk and the other students had spent days gathering wildflowers, weaving them into garlands that now decorated every surface. The new desks, built by Jeremiah during his recovery, had been pushed aside to create an aisle. The whole town had pitched in, determined to give their teacher and protector a wedding worthy of their sacrifice. Through the window, Clara could see people gathering, cowboys cleaned up and uncomfortable in their Sunday best, farmers' wives in carefully pressed dresses, children scrubbed and fidgeting with excitement. Even some of Cain's former workers had stayed, finding honest employment now that his shadow no longer darkened the territory. A knock at the door made her heart skip. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the women. Instead, Jeremiah filled the doorway, and Clara's breath caught. He wore a new black suit that emphasized his massive frame, his dark hair neatly trimmed, the silver ring she'd given him, his father's ring, gleaming on his hand. "You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony," Clara said, though she couldn't help smiling. "Wanted to give you something first." He held out a small wooden box, carved with delicate precision. "Made it while Doc had me on bed rest. Figured I should put these hands to gentle use." Inside, nestled on blue velvet, lay a silver locket. Clara opened it to find two tiny photographs, one of her students grouped in front of the school, the other of Jeremiah himself, looking uncomfortable but determined before the camera. "So you can carry us with you always," he said simply. Clara's eyes misted. "Help me put it on." His large fingers were surprisingly deft with a delicate clasp. As he fastened it around her neck, he said quietly, "Last chance to change your mind. I'm still just a big, scarred—" Clara turned and placed her fingers over his lips. "You're the man who protected my students, who built their desks and fixed their school, who showed me that strength and gentleness aren't opposites." She stood on her toes to kiss him softly. "You're my bear, my Jeremiah, and in an hour, you'll be my husband." He caught her against him gently, mindful of her dress. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both did," Clara said. "We found each other in the last place either of us expected. If that's not Providence, I don't know what is." The school bell began to ring, not the urgent clangor of alarm, but a joyful pealing that called the community to celebration. Jeremiah squeezed her once more, then headed for the door. "See you at the altar, Miss Whitworth." "Don't be late, Mr. Calhoun." An hour later, Clara walked down the aisle on Sheriff Thompson's arm. He'd insisted on the honor, saying someone had to represent law and order at this union. The schoolhouse was packed, people standing along the walls, children perched on shoulders for a better view. At the altar waited Jeremiah, with Tom Wheeler as his best man and Reverend Patterson beaming behind his worn Bible. But it was Jeremiah's face that held Clara's attention, the wonder in his eyes, the soft smile that transformed his scarred features, the way he looked at her like she was everything good in the world. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Reverend Patterson asked. "We all do," little Maria Delgado piped up before Sheriff Thompson could answer, causing laughter to ripple through the crowd. "I reckon that's about right," the sheriff agreed, grinning as he placed Clara's hand in Jeremiah's. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, but Clara felt the weight of every word. To have and to hold, she thought of Jeremiah's gentle hands building desks. For better or worse, they'd already faced the worst and survived. In sickness and in health, she remembered nursing his wounds, his refusal to give up. "Till death do us part, in this hard land." Those words carried extra meaning. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Patterson declared. "You may kiss your bride." Jeremiah cupped her face with infinite tenderness and kissed her while the schoolhouse erupted in cheers. Hats flew in the air. Children whooped and misses. Morrison could be heard sobbing happily into her handkerchief. The celebration spilled out into the street. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Every family had contributed something. Musicians appeared with fiddles and guitars, and soon couples were dancing in the dust of Main Street. Clara found herself passed from partner to partner, dancing with every man in town, while Jeremiah carefully waltzed with each of the children, his massive frame bent to accommodate their small heights. When they finally came together for a dance of their own, the crowd formed a circle around them, clapping in time to the music. "Happy?" Jeremiah asked, spinning her carefully. Beyond words. Clara replied, "Though I'm thinking we should have practiced this. You're going to step on my feet." "Never," he said solemnly. "These feet have carried me through war and wilderness. They can manage a wedding dance." And he was right. For all his size, he moved with that surprising grace, leading her through the steps as if they'd been dancing together all their lives. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Samuel Redhawk climbed onto a table, raising a glass of apple cider. "To Miss Clara," he called out. "I mean, Mrs. Calhoun." "To Mrs. Calhoun," the crowd echoed. "And to Mr. Bear, Mr. Calhoun," Samuel continued, "for protecting us all." More cheers, more toasts. Stories were told of the battle with Kane's men, already growing into legend. Someone started a collection for rebuilding the Redhawk farm. Plans were made for expanding the school, maybe bringing in a second teacher as more families moved to the now peaceful town. As the stars emerged, Clara stood with her new husband on the schoolhouse steps, watching their community celebrate. The building bore scars from bullets and fire, but it stood strong, ready for Monday's lessons. "What are you thinking?" Jeremiah asked, his arm around her waist. "That I came here to teach, but I learned so much more." Clara leaned into his solid warmth. "About courage and community, about standing up to evil, about love finding you when you least expect it." "Good lessons," he agreed. "Think we'll keep learning them?" "Every day," Clara promised. "Together." The school bell gleamed in the lamplight, silent now but ready to ring come Monday morning. Children who'd cowered from Kane's threats would sit at desks built by loving hands, learning from a teacher who'd fought for their future and protected by a man who'd chosen building over destroying. Mrs. Calhoun. Maria Delgado tugged at Clara's skirt. "Will you still be our teacher now that you're married?" Clara knelt down to the little girl's level. "Of course, sweetheart. Wild horses couldn't drag me away from my students." "Good," Maria said seriously, "because we need to learn everything. Mr. Calhoun says education makes us strong." "Mr. Calhoun is right," Clara said, smiling up at her husband. As the celebration continued around them, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. A broken engagement in St. Louis, a desperate flight to the frontier, a schoolhouse that needed a teacher and a town that needed hope, a gentle giant who'd learned that his strength could protect without destroying. Sometimes the greatest adventures began with the smallest acts of courage, ringing a school bell, standing up to a bully, choosing to see the best in someone the world had labeled a monster. "Dance with me again," Jeremiah said, and Clara took his hand, letting him lead her back into the swirl of music and laughter. The teacher and the protector, the beauty and her bear, two souls who'd found home in each other and in this unlikely town, as they danced under the vast western sky, surrounded by the community they'd helped save. Clara knew that every hard moment had been worth it. This was their beginning, not an ending, but a promise. Tomorrow there would be lessons to teach and lives to build. There would be children to educate and a town to strengthen. There would be quiet mornings in the schoolhouse and peaceful evenings on their own front porch. But tonight, there was music and joy and the warm weight of Jeremiah's hand in hers. Tonight, Dusty Hollow celebrated love's triumph over fear, community's victory over corruption, and the power of two wounded hearts choosing to heal together. The school bell would ring again come Monday, calling children to learn and grow. But for Clara Whitworth Calhoun, it would always sound like coming home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm curious, where are you enjoying this tale right now? Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories. And let me know your thoughts about Clara and Jeremiah's journey. Did their love story touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? I'd love to hear from you.